Greetings, everyone. We're here today with our good friend, author Mark Bannon. Mark's new book, The Boy from the Cave, is a soul-stirring journey from hopelessness to faith. Mark is an author, mentor, and guide who's dedicated to empowering individuals to overcome life's hardships, navigate challenges, and rise above the constant noise of the world. Drawing from his own journey of triumph over hopelessness and discovering the life-altering gift of faith, Mark's writings inspire readers through powerful storytelling and encouragement, while his mentorship provides tailored guidance for personal growth and resilience. Mark lives in Colorado with his loving wife, Amy, and has two grown children and a beautiful granddaughter. He draws inspiration through his faith and from treks in the foothills as he shares his transforming journey and empowers individuals to unlock their true potential. You can learn more at markabannon.com. So this is Mark's book. It's phenomenal. You won't be able to put it down when you start reading it. I can guarantee you that. Mark, it's so good to have you with us, and thanks so much for sharing your journey in the book and being with us here today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And
So we're going to talk about two different things. We're going to talk about Mark's book, and then we're going to talk about kind of the whole topic of find your next calling. I recently started that effort again, and Mark was kind enough to agree to talk with us about that, because as you'll hear in our talk and see through reading the book, Mark kind of found his next calling a couple of different times in his life in different ways.
a few different times.
And this book is almost surreal. It's an amazing story. And maybe could you give everyone just kind of the thumbnail overview to set the context, for the rest of our conversation?
Sure. Well, the book is a memoir, and it's a story of it's my particular story, which had some very interesting twists and turns. So at a minimum, I promise the reader they'll be entertained. It was kind of a bizarre story of life being thrown on its head at a very young age and some pretty good hardships and so forth. But really, Brian, it's really our collective story of overcoming adversity. And, everyone in life will face at some point some place of adversity, oftentimes even hopelessness, or in whatever form that might come. So this book is really a story about hope. It's a story about perseverance, endurance, overcoming, and ultimately, it's a story about faith, and it's a story about grace, and how through whatever we're going through, there's always some grace that we can find in it, and usually a lot of grace that we'll find in it, often in retrospect, in my case, but we find that eventually. So yeah, it's our collective story in life, and it's a come along story. I wrote it through the perspective of the age I was at when things were happening, and the lens that I was seeing the world through at that age. So as opposed to writing it from, where I am today as an adult with everything I know, I sort of carried the reader through this story of where, what that perspective was of where I was and what I knew at that time and point in life. So yeah,
That was really important, because part of the book was when you were pretty young, and part of the book was kind of as you were a young adult, so to speak, and most of us that are further along do have a much different perspective on life than we did at either one of those stages, as you discussed. So but
sure.
the book is divided into three sections, which is great. And it's basically the cave is the first, and then wandering, broadly speaking, and then finding.
Right.
So can you talk about a little bit about each one of those sections?
Yeah, so the story, The Boy from the Cave, it's it's a literal cave and it's a figurative cave. So when I was very young, that first part of the book brings the reader through what had happened when my life was thrown on its head, and we found ourselves living in poverty in a cement bunker in the woods of New Hampshire. And it was in the winter in the late 60s, 1969 and 1970. And I was 8 years old when we first went there, 9 years old, in that range, and went from a perfect little life of normal life with, upper middle class or middle class, whatever you might call it, normal living, and then into this sudden poverty and challenge. So the first part of the book is that sort of adversity and setting the tone for a trauma that happened that I didn't even realize was a trauma at the time. And the second part of the book is when I ran away from home at 15 years old in the beginning of my 10th grade year in high school and went out into the world. And I call that, 40 years of wandering because it literally was from the age of 15 to 55 years old that I had much wandering. I had many good achievements in life, many good successes, plenty of failure, epic failures. I was really good at that. And a lot of interesting stories. But the first part of the book, that trauma and unmet trauma, things that like I made a decision at the point that I ran away that this thing that happened to me was behind me. It was in my rear view mirror. I was never looking back. I was never going back. And I just moved forward into life and into some pretty good stages of recklessness in the process of it. So the second part of the book is that going from that traumatic, inciting incident of life into this 40 years of wandering. And then the last part of the book is sort of coming home, coming full circle and reconciling, closing that big story loop of life, so to speak. And so that's how the book breaks down into the three parts.
So, it's really incredible that you survived it all. And, one of the dramatic aspects of it was your father. I mean, the impact that
Yeah.
your dad had on all of this. And that had to take a while for you to come to grips with.
It did. It took a long while to come to grips with. I mean, as I mentioned, we had this sort of normal life that was typical. My dad was a post-World War II veteran. He came back. He got this great job. He met my mom, who was just an amazing, beautiful woman, Portuguese woman, and he had, raised a family, had 5 kids. I'm the youngest of 5, and we lived in suburbia, turbia, and all the little the stuff the check boxes that you did. And then it was on his 40th birthday that he had, I guess I call it a midlife crisis, because at the time I was just a young child, but he sold everything, quit everything, and bought 85 acres of woods in New Hampshire and moved us up there. Now, he had this idea, right, that he wanted to provide a better life for his kids. I didn't know that then. In fact, I didn't know it till after I helped him leave this earth when, in 2014, when he was 84 years old, and I was a 40, whatever old, 45-year-old, man. But it was this writing the book was very cathartic because I was able to sort of reconcile that and see, that we live in this world of contradiction. And we spend our life sometimes trying to reconcile contradictions. So, and we tend to pick our camp, I think we find in life. And so at that point that the things were happening, I looked at my father was pretty tough. He was a tough guy and, he could be mean at times. So you look at that as a child, and when I ran away and I was just like, trying to reconcile with how could he do this to us and blah, blah, blah. And then on the other side, there's this contradiction that he was also a man of incredible integrity. And he was a man of great work ethic. And he was a man of faith. And he had all these other attributes. And I could never reconcile, like, I never could see that part of him until maybe I made a lot of the same mistakes or choices that he made.
Hmm.
And you realize that both were true. He was that person that created this incredible conflict, trauma, and these things that I carried with me for decades. But on the other side, the other part of him was also he gave me everything that I could ask for in terms of that integrity and that sort of ambition and drive and faith and just endurance, that capability to endure. So
Hmm.
both are true. It was an interesting thing to reconcile with, but I have a lot of gratitude for him, at
We'll,
the end of
we'll
the
let
day.
we'll let people read the book to find out the rest of the details around all that. But it's incredible. That's all I can say. So, as you mentioned a minute ago, you through your, wandering phase had several significant financial successes and several crashes, financial business crashes. I mean, what was that roller coaster like?
It was interesting. It was interesting. It was this funny, weird thing that I had with, when I ran away, I was determined to go off into life and never be put in a position that I was in where a rug could be pulled out from under my feet. So I had this thing of this self. I was going to control it. I was going to take charge of it. You take no prisoners. You go through life. I'm going to achieve this, this, and this. And I would go off and with this incredible work ethic, or almost probably dysfunctional work ethic, 80-hour weeks and crazy schedules. I would work, 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 and I would, I enjoyed some great successes from that work and from that care and paying attention to the detail and all of that stuff. But every time I got to that place, I was empty and it didn't fill whatever void it was that I needed filled in my life. And I have this, and I still have this sort of, again, this contradiction with money and so forth. On the one hand, it's great. We need it. We have to live. We have to pay bills. On the other hand, it represented when we lost money and we lived with shame and poverty and embarrassment and what have you, it really focused me. I really have this interesting view of money that I've seen it do so much good, yet I've seen it do so much harm. The misuse of money, the greed of money, and people just doing anything for money. So when I'd have these things of success and I'd have this money, I had this weird sort of guilty feeling about it. I had this sort of disdain. I had this sort of like, what does that mean? All of a sudden, you're special, you're important because you're successful, but I'm the same person as I was when I wasn't successful. So that was sort of my thing. So I would be unhappy in that success. I wasn't content. The money didn't fulfill me, the positions, the possessions, the titles, and I was in search. I was in search for meaning. I was a lost boy that was searching for purpose in life. So I would kind of just blow up that bridge and say, nah, this isn't it. I'm going to go here, and I'd be looking to find my next calling, but yeah.
Well, as part of that journey, you tried several different religions and different self-help, kinds of things. Um, what was that like?
That was, I mean, honestly, there were parts, there was much that I left out of the book, believe it or not, as much as in there. And it was with this sort of tongue in cheek that I put some of these stories because, yeah, I mean, I literally tried everything. I was felt so, um, I felt this drive in me that, you were created for a reason. You survive these things that you survive for a reason. I could feel it, I could taste it, but I could never touch it. And it was always to me looking forward. It was like, don't look back, look forward. Just rear view mirror. You're not that person. Don't talk about it. Just move forward, kind of thing. And I tried everything. You'll read in the book that I tried numbing myself with anything that was possible to numb myself, whether that was substances or whether that was recklessness and adrenaline things, whatever it was, I tried something just to prove this sort of that I don't care or that I'm invincible or whatever it was that was not serving me. Um, and at a certain point, my life was in a really rough place. I was in the middle of my life, a beautiful marriage, and so blessed to be married for 37 years today to this amazing woman who saw in me obviously stuff that I didn't see in me at the time and stuck in there. And there was a lot of good in it. I have two beautiful children. We have these memories of these nice family things and all of that stuff. But within it all, I was just not content and I was not fulfilled. And then I started becoming pretty unhealthy, physically unhealthy. In my 30s, I actually I joke I got turned down for life insurance when I was 31 years old because they ran this logarithm and said, dude, yeah, we're not insuring
Too much
you,
risk.
you know? So like it was bad. So all of a sudden I came across this a lot of self-help books and this Eastern philosophies of, hey, wait a minute, slow down, change your diet, meditate, start getting out in nature. And they were really, honestly, tremendous things. They impacted my health, my mental and physical health in a great way. I started meditating, and then the more I started doing it, I'm an all or nothing person. So if I'm going to do this, I'm going all the way in. So before I knew it, and you'll read in the book, I won't go into tremendous detail, but I went into a 16-year jaunt into Eastern philosophies. And I tried, shamanism, Taoism, Buddhism, and I ended up on Hinduism and really, really liked it, really resonated with this sort of message. So I dove in and studied. I read the Bhagavad Gita. I read the 108 ancient Upanishads and studied them. I learned some Sanskrit. I got certified as a meditation instructor and an Ayurvedic health instructor. I got tattoos of Hindu gods on my body. I did whatever. I hiked in the Himalayan mountains. I stayed in ashrams. I even dunked in the Ganges River. I was going to do anything to get enlightened and to do this. And I have to say that it brought me 80% of the way there. I started being conscious of breathing and meditating and bonding with nature and exercise and different diet. And I lost weight. My blood pressure went into control. My cholesterol climbed down. And I was gratefully easy to get insurance. Got plenty of life insurance at that point. So it did a lot of really good things for me. Yet I woke up still late in life in my 50s, still saying, something missing. I'm just, there's something more and I can feel it, but I just can't reach it. I can't find it.
But you finally did.
So I did.
So
I
tell
did.
people about that.
So in a very humorous story, I was with a guy from India who had this incredible glow to him. And I was looking at this guy and spending all this time with him. We were working sort of side by side. And I looked at him, I'm like, man, you're just so, you're so, he just had this peace. He just glowed with this and he just had peace. So I worked side by side and asked him all about his life and his upbringing. He told me, and I would tell him about all the things I just told you. I did this and this, and I read the Upanishads at 4 a.m. and meditating. And he would just smile and say, tell me more, brother. Tell me more. What else did you do? What else did you learn? And then finally, after a couple of weeks, I'm with him and I look at him. He's got this big smile and emanating this peace. And I'm like, and I just break down. I start crying. I look and I said, man, he said, what's the matter, brother? And I said, I'm a fraud. I said, I'm a fraud, man. For 16 years, I get up at 4 a.m. and religiously I study this work. I meditate. I do this stuff. I've read everything. I've traveled the world. I've done everything there is to do to become enlightened. And I said, and I'm not. I don't feel that peace. I don't feel that joy truly. I feel, I'm healthy. My life's more vibrant, but there's something missing. I don't feel complete. And I said, and I look at you and you're enlightened. Tell me your secret. And he smiled this big giant smile and he said, well, I'm glad you finally asked. Put his hand on my shoulder and he said, brother, he said, I'm a Christian, man. And I just cracked up and I'm like, wait a minute. I'm like a Christian, and when you read my book, you'll understand I had some, like issues with running from God and hiding from God and afraid of God and, looking for God in anything but in God kind of thing. And so I looked at him and shocked. I thought he was kidding. And then finally he said, no, really, I'm a Christian. I converted years ago. And that's how I finally myself, I was like you. I had all this great stuff going on, but I just couldn't quite feel complete. And this completed me. I said, okay, so fine. So what's the secret? And he looked at me and he said, read the Bible. And I said, like after wanting to actually punch him, for that being, I'm like, what? Read the Bible. He's like, yeah. He's like, I say that jokingly. And he said, just read the Bible. So I said, okay, great. Listen, game on. I'm all in. I'll read the Bible. But then what? What's the secret? And he looked at me and he just smiled and put his hand up and he said, read the Bible. And so July 25th, 2015, I picked up my first Bible and I said, you know what? If I got up at 4 a.m. every day and did 3 hours of Eastern philosophies and meditation, I can read the Bible for an hour a day. So I picked up the Bible, and every single day since then to this day, this morning, I read the Bible. And, and little by little, and all this stuff, it's this, I'm not a super religious guy. I don't know how to be that guy. I was 55 years old when I cracked the Bible for the first time. So, but I can tell you that the reference of it being like the living word, and that it speaks to you and that it heals you. And it did. And little by little, I was starting, and I realized I had to sort of face these demons. And so I don't know, that was the sort of the trigger for the next evolution, that last part 3 of the book we talked about coming home. And it didn't make all the problems go away. It didn't, it wasn't like this snap of the fingers, a magic wand. There is no quick fix pill. But what it was it was this source of just power, wisdom, creation that leads you where you need to be and feeds you what you need to be fed exactly when you need it. And I can't explain it any more than that. That's about as religious as I can get with my explanations and stuff. But that's what happened, and that's what changed that whole trajectory of life.
So, in reading your book and in knowing you, there's a couple personal attributes that really stand out. One you mentioned, your work ethic is just amazing.
Yeah.
And I think you also kind of alluded to, once you decide to do something, you go gangbusters, right? You read up everything you can, whether it's a business thing or a religious thing or whatever.
Yeah.
What do you recommend to people in those areas?
Well, I think first that's a great question. I think the first thing that we need to do is decide when we're pursuing something, if we're pursuing it because we're running from something else, as opposed to being drawn to or gravitated to something that ignites us and is calling us. So I think the first piece of advice is, and that was a lot of my business, blowing up, we call them failures, but they were really self-implosions, because I was more running from a lot of things in my life to the next thing because I didn't like this thing. And I never took the time to sort of pull back and really connect with my calling, really connect with, what is my purpose? What is it? What are my gifts? What are my unique skills that I do know each one of us on this planet in creation has unique gifts and something very important to offer the world, every one of us. And so I think the first piece of advice is, if you're going to pursue anything, try to, within it, find that thing that ignites you. Now, that doesn't mean that, because there's a difference between doing and being, right? Like, you can have a job that's a job that you understand is a job because it's a paycheck and it supports your family and you're grateful for it. This is a very good job that supports my family. And you can find your calling within the job in how you're being, not necessarily in what you're doing. So in other words, I'm not necessarily saying that everybody should just quit their job and pursue something they're passionate about, but there's something that you're passionate about that if you can find it within your job, in the beingness, in your interactions, in your travels or whatever, great. And if you can't, find another job, or better yet, find, a vocation, something that you can incorporate those gifts and skills. Like, my wife has a skill. She's a realtor, but she has this incredible gift of working with senior people and older people and really loves it. And she volunteered for hospice and memory care and cancer care and all these different things. And so she does her job, but within it, she has these things she volunteers for. So it's important, I think, to find things that ignite us, to try to connect with those gifts we have that we're called to share with the world, to make the world a better place and to sort of make our own lives more meaningful in applying that. So and if you're going to do something, whatever you're doing, do it with grace, do it with dignity. If you took this time to do it, give it your all, but somewhere less than what I was doing. I became obsessed with things, right? And there's a balance in there too, where you're balancing things. So I hope any of that made any sense,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah. No, I mean, you and I are on the same wavelength. And part of one of the things I want to touch on too is Richard Rohr, right? His famous book Falling Upward, right? Where
right.
he talks about the first half of life and the second half of life, and you and I are both examples of that, in different
Yeah.
ways, but pretty serious examples of that, right? So, do you? I know you've read that book and you're familiar with what he's saying there. Is that the way you view things now too?
I have to tell you, Richard Rohr, Rohr for our viewers out there, and the book is Falling Upward. He runs a center,
Center for Action and Contemplation.
Action and Contemplation in New Mexico. His books are amazing. And the book Falling Upward was really, really, really powerful for me. I read it recently. I read it after I wrote my book, and I'm like, wow, this like really explains a lot. And in it, he talks about the two halves of life. I'll tell you where it really helped me immensely is I beat myself up for having wasted so much time or made so many mistakes in my youth or had been so fixated on getting those titles and those houses and those jobs and those positions and those possessions. And I almost vilified my own self for those ambitions. And when you read Richard Rohr's book, you realize that no, that's what you're supposed to do in that phase of life, because that's the part of life that you're going through to learn all the tools and to hone all those gifts and to discover that who you are and what it is that does ignite you and what are your special gifts. You have to go through all that. And we do live in a physical world that we actually have to pay an electric bill and a mortgage and things like that. So the book was really healing for me, and I think it's a great read for anyone that's in that phase, especially, transitioning to the second half of life to sort of reconcile. It's all good. So Richard Rohr, all of his works are amazing because he talks about that, that all of it, both sides of it are part of it. The complete picture includes everything. It includes everyone, and they're all, they all have their place in this evolution of life we're in. Super guy. Just
Yeah, yeah.
I love
Well,
it. Just love it.
like you, I didn't read it until after I had already gone through that transition myself. And people would tell me, "So Brian, you got to read this book because it describes what you did." And
Yeah.
really, okay, well, and sure enough, I mean, that whole metaphor of first half of life, second half of life was
Yeah.
pretty applicable to what what I experienced. So it's just when I see another example of that like you that is so clear, in terms of those phases, it's just great to see.
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff.
So, from a career perspective, some of the times, you had to decide something along the lines of what do I do next? You know,
Right.
looking back on that and particularly, more recently, have you really reflected much on the processes that you either used or would recommend for a person who is in that kind of discernment phase?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think for me, and it happened recently, I think when we sort of get to the place where it really has a lot to do with faith. It has a lot to do with faith to say, okay, wait a minute, you look back on your life, and all of us can do it. And there were these so many times in life that there were insurmountable things that when we were in them, we just were like, how am I ever going to get through this? And then in retrospect, you're like, oh yeah, and you realize that not only did you get through it, we usually got through this stuff with a reasonable amount of grace, right? And it's like you look back and go, that was actually a good thing. That actually was a stepping stone to get me from here to, from here to there. So I think that surrendering a little bit to faith and really reflecting on, really taking the time to sort of, like for me, I go out and I hike in nature. I trek in the foothills and I get these inspirations. But things find you. I've been mentoring several young people, men, or not necessarily even young, quite a age range actually. And I didn't seek it, and I don't do it for a job or for money. It's just people that would find me and say, "Hey, I wanted to have a cup of coffee," and all of a sudden you open yourself up to hearing and seeing other people and that second half of life thing. And so I think part of it is, again, I'll go back to for people that are seeking, that are feeling that they're at a point in life where they want to change or they want to look for their next calling and they're trying to figure out how to go about it. I think the first thing I would say again is make sure that you're not just doing something to run from something else. Make sure you're doing something that really speaks to your heart, that really feels like you're being pulled towards it, and then kind of just relax a little bit, pray a little bit, pray a lot bit actually, and let and have faith that the path is going to open up. And then when you've done that, it was interesting because I never in my life went to therapy until recently, until after writing the book. During the book, I was like, wow, it took me 3 years to write this book. There was like, when you read it, you'll understand there was a lot of red
A lot of
flags, as they
processing
say.
that had to go on, right?
But I really enjoy going to therapy, and I never thought I would say that. I mean, when I grew up, you didn't say those things. You didn't
Yeah.
do those things, right? Not with my father. But he talked. One of the things he said to me the other day is recently I said, well, yeah, I have faith in this. He said, yeah, faith, but action.
Hmm.
And I said, what? And he goes, yeah, faith, it's great and it's very important to have faith, but you must take action. So everything I just said about, make sure you're not running from something as opposed to being gravitated to something. Try and find something, some part of it. Doesn't have to be, in the job, but something in that arena that fulfills your highest ambitions. We have these drives in us, and by this point in life, each of us knows things that fulfill us and things that don't fulfill us. So a big thing for me was it was after deciding to really go towards those things that inspired me, after surrendering to faith, it gets down to doing some action, right? That God's not going to do it for us. He's going to put it on our heart. He's going to give us whatever tools we need to transcend this thing, but he's not going to just do it for us. We have to take the action. He's going to give us the will to do it, but we have to act on that will. So take action, just get in motion. And for me, the research and stuff, and to really get into it, a big part of it was, what am I going to eliminate from my life that is not serving me, that can make space for this thing that I want to pursue
That's so
so
important.
desperately.
So important.
And I did. When I wanted to write my book, it took so much out of me. More so because I took every course there was for write, dozens and dozens and dozens of courses. I read hundreds of books, literally. I studied, I did you name it, whatever webinars, whatever I could get in, I sponged it and studied it. But in order to be able to do that, I had to make space. So I stopped, during COVID, I think we all got addicted to Netflix and maybe too much drinking and whatever. I just quit drinking. I quit Netflix. I decided that when I watched the news, it was not putting me in a good place or good spirit. So I cut way back on my news consumption and decided I need to be in charge of, what and so eliminating whatever those things are that we can eliminate. And it doesn't mean necessarily bad things you're eliminating. Just we have to make space. There's only so many hours in the day. Most of us have families and jobs and this and that. We have to make space for that research and that study. But the biggest single thing is just get in motion. And if you don't know what direction to go, yes, that just go. North, south, east, west, doesn't matter. Just move. Because every time we move, once we get from that stagnated place that is so easy to stay in, well, I don't know what that's going to be. And if I do this, what's going to happen here? And if I leave this job, or what is my, family, what, blah, blah. There's all these doubts and fear. But if you feel it, and you're truly going to something that inspires you and you're studying it and you're researching it, then you just got to move. And when you move in any direction, if you don't know the direction, no matter what direction that we move in, a door opens. It's remarkable. It's just amazing how these doors open. And I went through so many doors that led me to places I never could have imagined that door would have led me to. So motion.
So let's get back to your book. As I mentioned, it's called The Boy from the Cave. How is the book launch going?
It's going good. I try not to do that compare thing because then it's like you're looking at,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
comparing to it's torture. But it's going, I look at there's so many people that I didn't expect to have read it that would read it and reach out and say, wow, you really helped me. I went and they tell me all of a sudden they tell me their story. And that's exactly when you're writing a memoir, it's you don't really want the book to be, it is about you, but it's not about you. It's about our collective story. And
Mhm.
so the biggest gift for me, I think, in it was realizing that somehow it inspired people to examine their own story and brought them to places of reflection and so forth. And that to me was the only goal I had in writing the book, was hoping that it would make a positive impact in just one person's life. And now it's so many lives. So I think our stories are important. And I think we need to, use our stories to inspire other people and influence other people. So
Well, it's clear that it would be really encouraging for people that are kind of in the middle of the wandering phase, right? Or had some early life trauma, that they're dealing with. At least from my perspective,
yeah.
this is like spot on helpful for anybody like that. But it I mean, I wouldn't say that I had a strong, need in those directions, but it was certainly entertaining,
Yeah.
at a minimum. I mean, because you say, oh my gosh,
That was the second part. It was like if at a minute, like entertain people with this because people read for a lot of reasons, for like three reasons, right? And entertainment is lot of them. So it's this journey. It's like, it's like kind of people have compared it to like Glass Castle, that kind of a story, educated those things of this sort of this dysfunction and this wild story that you go, wow, that's like crazy. But within it, I think there's a lot of, I hope there's some good messaging in there and inspiration in there and things like that.
So I know we were still in the midst of launching the book, but I have to ask you, what's next? Do you have any ideas, for another book or another project or
It's funny. I actually sort of started my next book, but I'm kind of like stepping back going, do I really want it? Because once I start it,
yeah.
that's a whole path. No, but some interesting stuff in my former work life opportunities came to me, and I've met some really neat people. So I'm kind of really enjoying just um, existing in my circles that I'm in now and being able to just be me, authentic and not and
A
just
more
be who
normal
I
life,
am
right?
for the first time, right? So yeah. So what's next is I really am enjoying like sort of the mentoring and interacting with people and sharing those stories. I enjoy being vulnerable, being able to say to people, it's okay to say the truth of how you feel. We don't, need to put on this front. And I think today with all the social media stuff with these young people, it's just this crazy world of people trying to live up and measure up and compare themselves. And so I just think, I don't know. For me, it's the mentoring. Yes, I definitely want to write another book, and I'm just tiptoeing into that because it's kind of like, a slippery slope
Well,
to
then there's no
consume.
rush, right? You still got
Yeah.
plenty of years ahead of you, and I'm sure, over the upcoming period of your life, you'll find all kinds of interesting things to do. So there's no concern in my mind about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Mark, congratulations on this fantastic new
Thank
book.
you.
I'm so glad to read it and so glad to meet you. And by the way, Mark's a veteran of writing for your life. And as part of his
Yeah.
writing
Yeah.
journey, he was, a big participant there. So that was wonderful.
Yeah,
And
that
again,
was really
check
good.
it out wherever books can be found, and in particular at Mark's website, markabannon.com. So Mark, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.